When Keanu Reeves was dragged into court and publicly humiliated by a federal judge, the world thought he was finally exposed. Until a single letter, read aloud in silence, changed everything. What was he hiding? And why did he let the world think the worst? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It started with a knock. Not a loud one, just 3 short raps on the front door of Keanu Reeves' quiet Los Angeles home. It was late morning, the sun streaming softly through the hedges that lined his walkway. He was barefoot, holding a half-empty mug of black coffee, still dressed in the same faded jeans and dark t-shirt he'd worn since yesterday. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, a man in a charcoal gray suit stood alone on the porch. No badge, no sunglasses, no FBI windbreaker. Just a messenger's calm posture and an envelope in hand. "Mr. Reeves," the man said politely, "you've been served." Keanu took the envelope without hesitation. His brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't speak. The man gave a slight nod and walked back down the path to an unmarked sedan parked at the curb. No camera crews, no drama, just a quiet delivery. Keanu closed the door and stared at the envelope in his hand. It wasn't a fan letter, it wasn't a script. It wasn't from a studio or a lawyer or a cause he supported. The seal on the corner told him everything he needed to know. United States District Court, Washington, D.C. His thumb hesitated at the fold. Instead of opening it, he walked into the kitchen and laid the envelope beside his mug. He stood there for a while, unmoving, listening to the silence of the house around him. When he finally sat down, he didn't open the document. Not yet. He simply stared at it, a knot forming low in his stomach. Not fear, exactly, but a pressure he couldn't name. By noon, the rumors had started. It was impossible to say where they came from first. Maybe an airline worker, maybe someone in the court system, maybe a neighbor who recognized the suit. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Keanu Reeves had been subpoenaed to appear in federal court. The headlines came fast and unrelenting. Keanu under scrutiny for secret funds. Federal court targets Hollywood icon. Reeves named in financial probe. What is he hiding? Some reports claimed he was being investigated for moving money offshore. Others hinted at illegal donations tied to foreign tech networks or unregistered charities. No official charges were listed. No clear accusations had surfaced. But that didn't stop the wildfire. By dusk, 3 news vans were parked outside his gate. Reporters shouted through the intercom. A drone buzzed overhead. Inside, Keanu sat at the edge of his bed, the unopened envelope still untouched on the nightstand. His phone buzzed with messages. His publicist, his manager, 2 close friends. He read none of them. He turned the phone over, face down. He had no answers to give, not yet. And tomorrow, the world would only have more questions. Keanu didn't call his lawyer. He didn't call anyone. Instead, he walked to his bookshelf and pulled down a worn leather notebook, one he hadn't opened in months. He thumbed through its pages, not looking for anything in particular, just grounding himself in something that didn't feel like headlines or noise. The court date was set for 5 days later. No explanation, no list of charges, just an order to appear. He'd booked his own flight that night. No assistance, no private jet, no legal team. A single ticket on a commercial red-eye to Washington, D.C. The next morning, the media descended in full force. Camera crews clustered along the sidewalk. Reporters barked questions through megaphones. A line of black SUVs, none belonging to him, blocked traffic for blocks as the chaos spiraled. Keanu didn't give them what they wanted. He left through the back alley with a backpack slung over his shoulder. A neighbor's teen offered him a ride to the airport. Keanu accepted. No disguise, no baseball cap. He simply nodded as the boy asked, "Are you okay, sir?" Keanu replied, "I will be." By the time he reached the airport, the rumors had evolved into full-blown theories. Commentators debated on talk shows whether Keanu had secretly been funding rogue humanitarian tech in countries with political instability. Others speculated about untraceable donations channeled through shell companies. Words like money laundering, illicit networks, and fraud were used casually, even though no evidence had surfaced. Social media was divided. Some people stood by him, insisting there had to be a mistake. Others, hungry for scandal, mocked his silence. The man known for disappearing from the spotlight had been pulled, unwillingly, into its harshest glare. At the terminal, Keanu waited in line with the rest of the passengers. A few people recognized him, but didn't approach. He looked calm, maybe too calm. As the plane took off, he stared out the window at the city shrinking beneath him. He could feel the weight of the entire country pressing against his back, not from guilt, but from expectation. In the seat beside him, a woman glanced his way, nervously. She recognized him. She opened her mouth to say something, but he gave her a gentle smile and returned his gaze to the clouds. He didn't need to speak. He wasn't running. He was showing up. Somewhere deep in his chest, he knew this trial wouldn't be about crime or innocence. It would be about belief. Whether the world still believed in the man they thought they knew, and whether he had the strength to let them find out on their own. The flight touched down just past midnight. Washington, D.C. was quiet at that hour, the runway lights blinking like distant stars. Keanu stepped off the plane with no entourage, no fanfare. A cold wind swept through the corridor as he walked toward the terminal, backpack over one shoulder, a knit cap pulled low on his head. Even here, in the stillness of early morning, he could feel it. The eyes. Two reporters waited at the exit gate. One clicked a photo, the flash reflecting off the glass behind him. The other asked bluntly, "Mr. Reeves, are you here to face criminal charges?" Keanu didn't flinch. He gave a single nod of acknowledgement but offered no answer. The driver, holding a court-issued placard, spotted him and gestured toward the curb. No small talk, no explanation. The car was plain black, the interior quiet. Keanu sat in the back, watching the Capitol pass by through rain-specked windows. Monuments flickered in the distance, shrouded in fog. The streets were empty except for the occasional cab or delivery truck. He thought about the envelope again. He still hadn't read it. Some part of him believed the words inside didn't matter. Not yet. Whatever accusation or inquiry was coming, it would reveal itself in time. What mattered more was how he showed up for it. Not as a star, not as a victim, as himself. The car pulled up to a modest hotel in the city's northeast quarter. No photographers here, no luxury suite. Just a quiet building with a small front desk and a night clerk who barely looked up. Keanu signed in under his real name. The clerk handed him a room key and a bottle of water without saying a word. In the elevator, Keanu finally pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket. He looked at the seal again. Federal Court of the District of Columbia. Back in his room, he sat on the edge of the bed, the city light glowing faintly through the curtains. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single-page summons. No charges, no indictment, just a demand. Appear in person. Courtroom 7B. Judge Meredith Cole presiding. The matter involved a review of undisclosed funds transmitted through raindrop systems and their intended use in global philanthropic ventures. Keanu read the sentence 3 times. Raindrop Systems. He hadn't heard that name in years. It wasn't his company, but he knew what it was, or rather, what it had become. A conduit, a lifeline, a secret. He set the paper down beside the hotel notepad and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow morning, he would walk into a courtroom without lawyers or statements. Not because he was naive, but because he understood something the world didn't yet. This wasn't about legality. It was about something deeper, about how far a man would go to stay invisible while trying to do good. Morning came slowly, wrapped in a heavy gray sky that matched the tension pressing against Keanu's chest. He had barely slept. His body rested, but his mind circled endlessly around the unknown. By 6 a.m. he was standing at the small hotel sink, adjusting the collar of a plain black suit. There was no tie, no designer pin, just clean lines and quiet dignity. He looked at himself in the mirror, not to admire or prepare, but to steady. His reflection gave nothing away. A black car waited outside. No driver from a studio, no press rep, just a standard sedan arranged by the court, like a reminder that today he was no one special. By 7:30, the courthouse steps were flooded with reporters and photographers. Police barricades had been set up, but the crowd spilled over the sidewalks. The buzz of anticipation hummed in the air like electricity before a storm. Some were chanting, others simply stared, phones raised. When the car pulled up, Keanu stepped out without hesitation. The cameras erupted. Microphones flew toward him from every direction. "Mr. Reeves, are you guilty? Do you deny funding raindrop systems? Is this the end of your career?" He said nothing. He didn't break stride. He walked up the marble steps with his head high and shoulders straight, as if walking into a scene he never auditioned for but knew was his to face. Inside, the lobby was cold, the walls lined with steel and stone. Security scanned him with mechanical precision. No one offered small talk. No one smiled. He was ushered into courtroom 7B by a silent marshal, past rows of empty benches and flickering overhead lights. But the courtroom itself wasn't empty. The public gallery was full. Journalists, legal analysts, curious citizens. They whispered until they saw him. Then silence fell like a curtain. Keanu took his seat at the defendant's table. There was no legal team beside him, just an appointed standby counsel seated a row back. The judge had been notified in advance. He was waiving representation. The court had approved it, reluctantly. At exactly 8 a.m., the door at the far end opened, and a woman entered wearing black robes and a presence that filled the room instantly. Justice Meredith Cole, known throughout the legal world as a force of nature, unyielding, brilliant, and famously intolerant of showmanship. Her record was clean, her stare was cutting, her decisions were final. She climbed the steps to the bench, adjusted her glasses, and spoke. "Mr. Reeves, you are not above the law." The room didn't breathe. Keanu stood slowly, nodded once, and remained silent. The roast was about to begin. Justice Cole's voice sliced through the silence with clarity that left no room for interpretation. "You are here today because financial pathways tied to your name have shown repeated anomalies. Unregistered transactions, anonymous donations, traced to a ghost entity called Raindrop Systems, a name that appears in multiple high-risk territories, a name that, until yesterday, had no owner, no known founder, and no traceable fingerprints." She paused, letting her words hang. "You, Mr. Reeves, are not on trial for a crime. Yet. But you are here because justice demands transparency. And in your case, that transparency is lacking." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Keanu remained standing, hands clasped lightly in front of him, still silent. The judge continued, her tone growing sharper. "You've earned a reputation in the public eye as thoughtful, charitable, even humble. But our court is not in the business of reputations. We deal in evidence. You have declined legal counsel, declined interviews, declined to comment on the allegations, and I must ask..." She leaned forward slightly. "Is that humility or evasion?" Gasps. Someone in the back scoffed. A photographer snapped a shot. Keanu looked directly at her, eyes calm, posture unshaken. But he didn't speak. The judge narrowed her eyes. "You see, Mr. Reeves, silence may feel virtuous to you, but in this room, it reads as withholding. The funds in question were moved through systems designed to obscure origin and destination. Lives were changed by that money, yes, but laws were ignored, audits avoided. If your hands are clean, why hide them? The courtroom held still. Keanu finally blinked but remained composed. The judge flipped through a folder of documents on her bench. She held one up. This is a wiring receipt. $500,000 anonymously donated to a failing refugee school in Armenia. That school survived another year because of it, but the account it came from was owned by Raindrop Systems, registered in Panama. No board, no mission statement, just movement. And that's the pattern with every donation we've tracked. She set the document down. Do you understand the gravity of what's happening here? Keanu nodded once. That's all? She asked. A nod. Again, he said nothing. One of the jurors shifted uncomfortably. A man in the press box scribbled furiously in his notebook. The courtroom, which had arrived eager to witness a dramatic confession or denial, now buzzed with something more unsettling. The judge folded her hands, tapping her fingers against the bench. Very well. If you will not explain yourself, we will proceed with the presentation of evidence. But I warn you, Mr. Reeves, your silence will not protect you from public scrutiny or legal consequence. Keanu looked down, then back up again. His silence wasn't meant to protect himself. It was to protect something else. Something no one in that courtroom understood yet. Justice Cole signaled to the bailiff, who rolled out a cart stacked with folders and a laptop for the evidence presentation. A large screen flickered to life at the side of the courtroom. Exhibit A, she said, a series of recurring deposits made from a U.S.-based production account to an offshore holding company known only as Blue Haze Corporation. Blue Haze, in turn, funded Raindrop Systems. Mr. Reeves' name appears nowhere in the documentation, but the production account was tied to his last film. She clicked through each screen, transfers, timelines, connections. To the public, she said, this looks like generosity, but without oversight, we cannot verify whether these were legal donations or manipulated transactions. Then she leaned back, her voice losing its edge, turning contemplative. Let me be clear, Mr. Reeves, I do not believe you are here because of greed or ambition, but the law does not bend for nobility. If you intended to help people, that is admirable, but when the help bypasses regulation, it becomes unaccountable. And when it becomes unaccountable, it becomes dangerous. She folded her arms. You are not the first well-meaning figure to fall into the trap of secrecy. Still, Keanu stood quiet. In the back of the courtroom, a woman with dark hair and a pale blue coat lowered her eyes. She had been watching him the entire time. Not blinking. Her name was Eva Morales, but no one knew her yet. The judge's voice filled the room once more. I will offer you one final chance to speak, Mr. Reeves, not to clear your name, but to clarify your role, because if you remain silent, the court will define your legacy for you. Keanu looked up again, but instead of answering, he slowly took his seat. No defiance, no arrogance, just the steady quiet of a man who had already made peace with being misunderstood. The judge stared at him, clearly frustrated but not surprised. Then she addressed the courtroom. This session will recess until tomorrow morning. I expect full cooperation moving forward. Mr. Reeves, your silence may win you sympathy outside this courtroom, but in here, it earns only scrutiny. Think carefully before wasting that sympathy. With that, she stood and exited the room. The gavel never came down. The cameras clicked like thunder. And as Keanu rose and turned to leave, the entire gallery remained seated, eyes fixed on him. Not because he had spoken, but because he hadn't. The courtroom was packed to capacity. People stood along the back wall, shoulder to shoulder, just to witness what the news was already calling the most uncomfortable silence in Hollywood history. From senators to school teachers, the eyes of the nation were fixed on one man, sitting alone at a courtroom table, quiet, solemn, unflinching. Keanu Reeves hadn't spoken a single word since entering the courthouse. Not to reporters, not to court officials, not even to the standby attorney the court had offered him again that morning. He simply nodded and took his seat. At exactly 8 a.m., Justice Meredith Cole walked in, and the chatter stopped cold. The air was tense, thick with anticipation. She wasted no time. She opened a folder in front of her and looked straight at him. "Mr. Reeves, you continue to remain silent, so I will speak." Her voice was sharp, but not theatrical. Every word landed with precision. "You've become known for giving, quietly, anonymously. Until now, the world saw that as admirable, as humility. But what happens when anonymous donations start influencing entire regions of the world? What happens when kindness has no trail, no face, no accountability?" She picked up a stack of papers from her bench and held them high. "These are transaction records, all of them tied to an unregistered humanitarian shell, Raindrop Systems. And each transaction is shrouded in layers of offshore holdings, encrypted pathways, and shadow donors. Not once does your name appear. But the funding patterns match accounts linked to your projects, your productions, your trusts." She flipped to another page and continued. "Over the past 6 years, this entity has transferred more than $17 million to various humanitarian causes. Many of those donations arrived in places that desperately needed them: conflict zones, natural disaster sites, famine-stricken areas. But none of them were monitored. None of them were declared. And you expect us to believe this was just generosity?" The room sat still, no whispers this time, just stunned attention. Justice Cole stepped away from her bench and began to walk slowly across the front of the courtroom, letting her words hang in the air. "I want to be clear," she said. "You are not being tried for stealing, you are not accused of funding violence, you are not charged with fraud." She stopped in front of Keanu and looked directly at him. "You were here because when we asked who, no one could answer. When we asked how, no one could trace it. And when we asked why, the world pointed to you. Because only someone invisible could create something so massive and leave no fingerprints." Keanu didn't move. His face showed no resistance, no arrogance, no fear. Just calm. The kind of calm that made people uneasy. Justice Cole returned to her bench, adjusted her glasses, and opened another folder labeled Media and Public Response. The courtroom lights buzzed faintly overhead as she read aloud, her voice steady and cold. "Let me quote directly from a few headlines published in the last 24 hours, she said. The kind-hearted manipulator? From the Washington Dispatch. When charity becomes control by the Federal Review, and perhaps the most cutting? Hollywood's saint or sovereign of secrecy." He paused just long enough for the silence to sting. "These aren't accusations born from tabloids," she said. "These are reflections of the confusion your silence has created. In the absence of your truth, the world is writing its own." She turned the page and continued. "Raindrop Systems operated with no legal registration in any jurisdiction, no board of directors, no published mission, yet it funneled more money than most state-funded NGOs. Some of those donations did immense good, rebuilding schools in war-torn provinces, supplying clean water after typhoons, supporting prosthetic clinics in remote deserts." She looked at him again. And that's the problem. People in the courtroom exchanged glances. Even the reporters hesitated to take notes. "Yes, Mr. Reeves," she said slowly. "That's the problem. You did good. Too quietly, too powerfully, too outside the system." Her next words came like a knife. "You chose to operate above oversight, outside regulation, beyond transparency. You chose to help, but without responsibility." She leaned forward. "So, now I must ask, was this truly selflessness, or was it control in disguise?" Keanu didn't flinch. His hands remained folded, resting lightly on the polished wood table. "You see, there's a growing belief," the judge said, "that kindness can be weaponized. That good intentions, when hidden, can become tools for influence. That one man with unchecked power, even in the name of compassion, can tilt fragile societies." She tapped the bench lightly. "And if you believe I'm being harsh, understand this. History is full of men who believed their hearts justified the rules they broke." She lifted a final page smaller than the rest, a short letter. "This note," she said, "was discovered taped to the door of a relief camp in Myanmar, written in childlike handwriting. It said, 'Thank you, raindrop. We have light again.'" Her eyes dropped to the page. And yet that same camp was later raided by armed factions. Supplies taken, children injured, all because no one knew who to call. No one could answer for what was delivered. She folded the paper slowly, and no one could protect what was given. Earth. A hush fell across the courtroom. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't admiration. It was something more fragile. Justice Cole let the letter rest on her bench, her fingers still gently touching its folded edges. Then, with careful precision, she lifted her eyes and fixed them once more on Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, I am not here to judge your heart," she said quietly. "I am here to examine your actions. The question this court must answer is not whether you meant well. The question is what happens when good intentions bypass all accountability." She let that hang in the air. "You built a structure that answered to no one. Not even you. You routed millions through countries designed to conceal wealth, and yet every recipient believed they were being saved by a faithless hand." She leaned slightly forward. "And in a world as fragile as ours, that kind of mystery creates risk. It creates chaos, and chaos, no matter how well intended, will always demand a reckoning." The room stayed still. Even the courtroom cameras, so often flashing and adjusting, seemed to hesitate. "You may not have set out to break laws," she continued, "but you did break a system. You embarrassed regulators, evaded government protocols, and you did it with the full knowledge that no one would dare question you, because you are beloved." There was no mockery in her voice, no sarcasm, only disappointment. "You once said in an interview that you never wanted to be seen as a savior," she said, flipping through a transcript. "But what do you call it when you lift a village out of starvation, rebuild a school, pay for 100 cancer treatments, and then vanish, leaving no one to explain the miracle?" A murmur passed through the audience. She held up a final document, a chart mapping global raindrop transactions. "This," she said, "is not charity. This is infrastructure. Invisible infrastructure, built by a man who never put his name on any building, any plaque, any credit line." She paused. "Perhaps because you didn't want recognition, or perhaps because you didn't want consequences?" Keanu blinked once. It was the only movement he made. Justice Cole slowly placed the chart down, then folded her hands over it. "This is not just about what you gave, it's about what you withheld. You withheld your name, your voice, your responsibility." Then her voice softened, just slightly. "And that silence, Mr. Reeves, may be the most dangerous gift of all." A beat passed. The courtroom didn't breathe. Keanu sat, eyes steady, but his shoulders carried the full weight of what had been said. He made no move to speak, not even now. The judge tapped her gavel once, softly. "We will reconvene tomorrow. The court remains in deliberation." As she stood and turned away, the doors at the back opened. The audience remained frozen. And Keanu Reeves, still silent, slowly rose and walked out of the room, leaving behind only questions. And one woman in a pale blue coat who had just taken a step forward. By the time Keanu Reeves stepped into the hallway, the courtroom footage had already begun to spread. It started with a clip 62 seconds long, posted by a freelance reporter sitting in the third row. The caption read, Judge destroys Keanu Reeves in public hearing. Must see. Within 10 minutes, it had 10,000 views. By the time Keanu reached the hotel that evening, it had over 5 million. The video showed Justice Cole at her sharpest, reading headlines aloud, questioning Keanu's motives, and delivering the now infamous line, "Is your kindness a shield for chaos?" It didn't matter that Keanu had said nothing. In fact, it was the nothing that made it impossible to ignore. People watched it again and again. His stillness, his calm, his refusal to fight back. They clipped different angles, zoomed in on his face, added dramatic music, even slow magnet edits with captions like, "When silence speaks louder than defense." Late-night hosts jumped in immediately. One joked, even John Wick would have said something by now. Another mockingly held up a blank sheet of paper and said, "This is Keanu's legal defense." The audience roared. Comment sections were brutal. He always knew he was hiding something. "Lance, here's what she thinks he's better than the law just because he plays heroes." This is what happens when you let actors play savior unchecked. But not everyone joined the pile-on. Some voices pushed back. One user posted, "You're missing the point. He's not defending himself. Maybe because he's not playing the game." Another wrote, "The judge came in hot, but Keanu didn't flinch. That says something." Still, the dominant narrative held strong. Keanu Reeves had been publicly humiliated and had done absolutely nothing to stop it. By morning, the #1 trending video on every platform was titled, "Keanu versus the Judge, the Fall of a Legend." 50 million views in 24 hours. Paparazzi waited outside his hotel, shouting questions he never answered. News vans blocked traffic for blocks. And behind closed doors, PR experts, legal strategists, and even a few government officials scrambled to understand the deeper truth. What did Keanu know? Why wouldn't he speak? And perhaps the real question, why were so many people still rooting for him? Because beneath the noise, beneath the memes and hashtags, something strange was happening. People were starting to question the story. And it wasn't because of anything Keanu said. It was because of everything he didn't. While social media continued its frenzy, a shift began to stir on a quieter corner of the internet. Not from celebrities, influencers, or pundits, but from people in places where the name Raindrop meant something very different. An anonymous account posted on a humanitarian forum, "I worked in northern Kenya in 2019. We were out of insulin. Then a plane landed. No logos, no names, just boxes stamped with a blue water symbol. They saved 26 children." That symbol? It was Raindrop. Another story surfaced from a nurse in Beirut. "When our clinic was bombed, I stayed behind. The next day, crates arrived with trauma kits. I've never told anyone, but today I saw that symbol on a screenshot from court. That's what saved us." No reporters picked up on these posts right away, but a few digital sleuths, YouTubers, Redditors, open-source investigators began tracing the timeline. Every time Keanu had been off-grid for a week, for a month, for a mysterious retreat, something extraordinary had happened somewhere in the world. Earthquakes, floods, refugee crises, and always, just afterward, relief packages stamped with that same faint emblem, a single raindrop inside a circle. It couldn't be proven, not yet. But the silence that once looked like guilt started to feel different. Maybe it wasn't cowardice. Maybe it was restraint. A TikTok went viral with clips of Keanu in interviews saying things like, "The world doesn't need more noise. Sometimes it needs someone to just show up." The comment section exploded. "He's always been this way. You really think he'd need credit? Why would someone go to this much trouble to hide being good?" As the narrative began to fracture, even news anchors found themselves adjusting their tone. One nightly news broadcast opened with, "Tonight, new questions arise in the Keanu Reeves courtroom controversy." What if the man who said nothing was never hiding at all? Meanwhile, Keanu remained silent. No tweets, no interviews, no statements from his publicist. He was seen once, exiting the hotel at sunrise to take a walk, alone, no bodyguards, just a black hoodie, sunglasses, and hands in his pockets. The paparazzi caught the image. That photo, Keanu standing on a quiet bridge over the Potomac River, head bowed, backlit by the morning sun, was shared 20 million times in 48 hours. No caption, just the image. To some, it looked like defeat. To others, it looked like peace. But one thing became clear. The louder the world screamed, the more his silence pulled them in. And that silence had begun to ask a new question. Not what is he hiding, but what is he protecting? By the end of the second day, the media storm had become something else entirely. The same morning shows that mocked Keanu were now replaying the footage with more measured tones. Pundits who once called him arrogant began backpedaling, urging viewers to wait for the facts. One anchor, known for his aggressive style, looked into the camera and said, "Maybe we rushed this one." But the loudest voices weren't on TV. They were in the comment sections. On every platform, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, thousands of people began sharing their own fragments of Raindrop. Not photos, not evidence, just memories. One after another. A woman from Croatia wrote, "I worked for a refugee center near the border. I never knew who funded us. Just that supplies came without fail. The logo was simple. I remember that drop. It meant someone out there cared." A man in the Philippines added, "Our fishing village was destroyed by a typhoon. We had nothing. Then a boat came, unmarked. They gave us nets, clean water kits, medicine, no cameras, no politicians, just a quiet team. They wore black. I never forgot." These weren't coordinated. There was no campaign, no PR push, just ripple after ripple. Ordinary people remembering something that, at the time, felt like a miracle. Something that now had a name. Raindrop. And slowly, the internet began to shift. Memes that once mocked Keanu started taking on a new tone. One viral post showed his face, overlaid with the words, "When you do good and ask for nothing, the world won't understand until it does." Even comedians backed off. One late-night host opened with, "You ever say something that felt funny at the time and then learned the guy you joked about might have quietly saved 10,000 lives?" Yeah, me too. The tension had changed. It wasn't outrage anymore. It was confusion, wonder, and for some, shame. Because while the world had demanded answers, mocked his silence, and dissected his motives, Keanu never once raised his voice, never explained, never pointed fingers. He let the storm rage. And still, he walked through it alone. That night, a poll was conducted across 3 major networks, asking a simple question: do you believe Keanu Reeves is guilty of wrongdoing? 71% responded no. Only 13% said yes. The rest said they didn't know. But they were willing to listen. It was a remarkable shift. And it all happened without a single press conference or apology. Because sometimes the most powerful answer isn't a defense. It's quiet conviction. And somewhere in a small apartment in Washington, D.C., a woman named Eva Morales sat watching the latest broadcast, holding a folder of documents close to her chest. She was trembling, not out of fear, but because she knew something no one else did yet. Tomorrow, when she took the stand, the silence would finally be broken, and the world would never see Keanu the same way again. Eva Morales hadn't planned on being there. She wasn't on the list of witnesses. No one had called her to testify. No reporters knew her name. But when she saw the courtroom footage go viral, something inside her shifted. She bought a bus ticket from Baltimore that same night, packed light, wore a plain gray coat, carried only her phone, a worn folder, and a letter, one that had remained sealed for 4 years. Now she sat silently in the back row of courtroom 7B, hands clasped in her lap, shoulders stiff from tension. Her brown eyes stayed fixed on the man seated near the front. Keanu Reeves hadn't turned to look at her. He probably didn't know she was there. Or maybe he did and chose not to show it. Either way, Eva wasn't there for recognition. She was there because the world was finally asking questions about a man who had once changed everything for her, and done it without leaving a name behind. She remembered it like it was yesterday. In 2018, Eva had been the director of a refugee-based education network operating out of Thessaloniki, Greece. It was a bold initiative, bringing coding and communication tech to refugee teens who had been displaced by war. Girls who'd never touched a keyboard, boys who had never seen a cell tower. They had built something special, something rare. Then one morning, their entire operation collapsed. A funding partner had pulled out without warning. A bureaucratic error froze their nonprofit status. Donations dried up. Government support evaporated overnight. Eva remembered standing in the middle of their converted warehouse space, staring at boxes of equipment they could no longer afford to ship. They had 2 weeks to shut down. She'd cried once, alone after the students had gone home. Not from weakness, from helplessness. Then, days later, she received a message through an encrypted channel. No sender ID, no name, just a clean wire transfer notice and a note. Keep teaching. The world needs light in dark places. Raindrop Systems. The name was in the memo line. She hadn't told anyone, not even her team. She wasn't sure if it had been a mistake. Maybe some donor had misclicked. Maybe it was a scam. But the funds cleared. They covered every last pending cost. And so they stayed open. Not just that month, but every month that followed. For 2 years. Eva had tried to trace the donor. She reached out to banks, filed inquiries. No one could tell her anything. Eventually, she stopped asking and started accepting. Whoever it was, they had saved everything. Quietly, kindly, completely. And now that same name, Raindrop, was plastered across court transcripts and viral videos, and the man the world was blaming had never spoken up to take credit. Eva looked at him now, still silent in that courtroom chair. He didn't need to say anything. She already knew the truth. Eva's fingers tightened around the folder in her lap as the judge entered and called the session to order. She sat perfectly still, trying not to draw attention. She had deliberately chosen a seat in the last row. From there, she could see everything without being seen herself. Justice Cole's voice was as sharp as it had been the day before. She recited a brief overview of the case, then looked directly at Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "this court continues to give you every opportunity to respond, yet you remain silent." Keanu nodded once. Nothing more. Eva watched the moment unfold, feeling the same tension that had gripped the country now press against her chest. She could hear the shifting in the seats ahead of her, the buzz of the press behind the barrier, the rapid clicks of courtroom sketch artists trying to capture his expression. And still, he said nothing. Not in defiance, but with a kind of discipline she didn't recognize in most people. Justice Cole continued her opening remarks, laying out a summary of transactions, timelines, and inconsistencies surrounding Raindrop Systems. As she spoke, Eva didn't move. Her eyes remained locked on Keanu. The folder in her hands was worn from years of being opened and closed. Inside were photographs, ledgers, and the original anonymous wire confirmation. But it was the letter tucked in the side pocket that weighed most heavily. She hadn't planned to bring it. In fact, she hadn't even opened it. It had arrived nearly 4 years earlier, addressed to E. Morales, Thessaloniki office. No return address, no stamps, just hand-delivered by a translator who'd claimed a stranger had left it outside the clinic she volunteered at on weekends. The letter had one sentence, written in clean, elegant handwriting. "If you ever need the truth, speak it yourself." Eva never told anyone about it. Until now, she had almost convinced herself it was just a strange coincidence. But after watching the courtroom video, after hearing the judge speak those words, "A shield for chaos," she had gone to the drawer, opened the envelope again, and realized that moment had finally come. She didn't want fame. She didn't want to go viral. She just wanted to remind the world that not every mystery is a threat. Some are acts of love. At the front of the courtroom, the judge called for a short recess. People stood. Some left for coffee. Others rushed outside to call their editors. Eva rose slowly. Her heart beat faster now. She looked once more at Keanu before slipping her folder into her coat. He still hadn't turned around, hadn't even glanced her way. But somehow she felt seen. She didn't walk toward the front. She walked quietly toward the back exit, unnoticed, holding the truth in her hands. The hallway outside courtroom 7B was surprisingly quiet. Most reporters had rushed down the opposite wing toward the press briefing room, hoping for a leaked update. Security guards stood casually near the elevators, not expecting anything unusual from this particular corridor. Eva kept her head down as she walked toward the exit, the folded folder pressed against her ribs, warm from the heat of her body and the tension building inside her. She paused at the end of the hallway and leaned against a marble column. For a moment, she simply breathed. She knew what she had to do next. There was one person in that courthouse who might listen, a clerk named Devon, someone she had contacted the night before through a secure line after pulling every string she could. She hadn't revealed who she was, only that she had information. Real information that could shed light on the case. Eva had left her number and hadn't expected a reply. But Devon had texted her at 6 a.m. with a single instruction. Come to the East Wing. Wait near the archive. She was 10 minutes early. While she waited, her thoughts wandered. She pictured the faces of the refugee students in Greece, especially the ones who never believed anyone cared about them until the laptops arrived, until the lights stayed on, until the water ran clear. She remembered a boy named Hassan who had once asked, "Why would someone help us if they don't even know our names?" At the time she had said, "Because some people believe doing good is the only reason they need." But she didn't know then that behind that aid was someone who might one day need help himself. The hallway remained empty until she heard a door click open softly behind her. A young man in a gray suit stepped into view, glanced around, and made eye contact with her. "Do you Eva Morales?" he asked. She nodded. He looked both directions before motioning her into the archive room. Inside, the lights buzzed faintly. Shelves lined the walls, boxes of files, the kind of room no camera ever entered. Devon shut the door behind them and folded his arms. "You said you have something," he said. Eva opened her coat, pulled out the folder, and placed it on the table. This is what Raindrop really was. Where the money went, who it helped, the things they don't know how to trace because it wasn't about headlines. It was about people. Devon's expression didn't change, but he stepped closer, flipping open the folder. Then he saw the letter. He paused. "Did he give this to you?" "No," Eva said. "He gave it to the world. I just happened to hold on to it." Devon looked at her carefully. "I think it's time someone read it." Eva nodded. And somewhere, behind courtroom doors and flashing headlines, the first steps toward the truth had quietly begun. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with tension before the judge even entered. But this time, something was different. Reporters whispered urgently to one another. The prosecutor looked restless, flipping through new paperwork that hadn't been there yesterday. Keanu sat in his usual place, still, silent, but this time something in the air seemed to lean in his direction. Justice Meredith Cole entered briskly and took her seat. She didn't look up at first. She read quietly from a new file before lifting her eyes. "We've received updated information regarding the financial trail connected to Raindrop Systems," she said. "The court will allow a brief recess in formal questioning to review this material for public record." Gasps swept the room. Eva Morales wasn't in the audience this time. She didn't need to be. The folder she had passed to the court clerk, along with supporting digital copies and verified signatures, had triggered a secondary investigation. And for the first time, the story behind Raindrop Systems wasn't being told through leaks or assumptions. It was coming from inside the record itself. The lead prosecutor, a sharp and seasoned man named Victor Raines, stood up to reframe his argument. "Your Honor," he began, "initial findings showed Raindrop Systems to be a shell company established in 2015. It had no board, no listed employees, and no direct founder on record. Its banking activity was routed through Luxembourg, Belize, and the Marshall Islands. All signs pointed to a classic laundering mechanism." He paused for effect. "However," he said slowly, "we've now been presented with primary source material indicating that Raindrop was not merely a financial entity. It appears to have functioned as a covert, philanthropic channel, one that funded projects with no consistent political, religious, or commercial affiliation." Justice Cole narrowed her eyes. "Meaning?" Raines turned a page. "Meaning we've identified at least 43 institutions across 17 countries that received life-saving funding from Raindrop. These include medical clinics, schools, clean water systems, war zone communication hubs, women's shelters, and food security pilots. In every case, the funds were delivered anonymously. In most cases, the recipients were unaware of who helped them, only that the help came in moments of desperation." Someone in the courtroom audibly exhaled. "And until yesterday," Raines continued, "none of those acts had been directly associated with Mr. Reeves." He turned to face Keanu. "No statements, no press, no documentation tying you to Raindrop, except for one indirect line, a single trust signed by an offshore manager with a handwriting match to your known film production contracts." Justice Cole leaned forward. "Are you suggesting Mr. Reeves was behind Raindrop?" Raines took a long breath. "I'm suggesting we may have misunderstood the intent behind its design. What we took for obfuscation may have been intentional anonymity, for the purpose of preserving dignity for the recipients, not hiding criminal behavior." The room went still. Keanu didn't move. Justice Cole looked down at the folder again. And a new kind of silence settled over the room. Outside the courthouse, the headlines changed overnight. The phrase "ghost philanthropist" resurfaced, but this time with reverence instead of sarcasm. News outlets that once blasted Keanu's silence were now dissecting the list of Raindrop beneficiaries. CNN ran a segment titled, "The Secret Beneath the Silence: Who Keanu Helped Without a Word." Even the morning shows softened. One correspondent said, "It's rare to see someone use that much money, that much influence, and never ask for credit. Maybe we judged too fast." Back inside the courtroom, Victor Raines continued presenting the findings. He projected a world map onto a screen behind the bench. Dozens of yellow dots appeared, each representing a Raindrop-funded project. A refugee coding school in Jordan, a trauma surgery unit in Mozambique, a drought-resistant water rig in New Mexico. Each one had received unexpected, quiet aid during crises, funds that had never been traced until now. Raines turned to the room. "If this is money laundering, it's the least profitable, least public laundering scheme in the history of financial crime." The crowd chuckled quietly. Even the judge cracked the faintest smile. But then Raines grew serious again. "What's notable is not just where the money went, but how it was structured. Raindrop didn't use direct payments. It used intermediaries, small, often local channels, community workers, medical field agents, which means someone went to extraordinary lengths to keep the paper trail clean, not for themselves, but for the people being helped." He paused, then added, "To hide money is easy. To hide impact is not. And the fact that we've only now discovered it, after nearly a decade, speaks to the discipline and care behind the operation." All eyes turned again to Keanu. Still seated, still silent, Raines stepped back and sat down. Justice Cole remained still for a moment. Then she addressed the court. "We will recess briefly while the court evaluates the new documentation. Upon return, we will determine whether continued prosecution is in the public interest or whether this court has been misled regarding intent." People began murmuring. Cameras clicked furiously. The air buzzed with the energy of something changing, something unraveling. Keanu stood up slowly, not to leave, just to stretch as permitted during recess. As he turned for the first time, he looked toward the back of the courtroom, not to the press, not to the judge, but to an empty seat where Ava had sat the day before. He didn't smile, but his eyes held something, a thank you, a recognition, and for those who caught the moment, it was the only gesture they needed. Because for the first time in days, it looked like the truth had a pulse, and it was just beginning to breathe. When the court resumed after the brief recess, the mood had undeniably changed. Even Justice Cole, known for her razor-sharp discipline and reluctance to entertain sentiment, glanced down at the new evidence for a long moment before lifting her gaze again. Her voice was steady, but no longer cutting. "The material presented raises substantive questions," she said. "Not just about the origin of funds, but about intent, anonymity, and the possibility of misinterpretation by this court." She turned to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, the court still does not have a formal statement from you. Do you wish to speak before we proceed?" Keanu remained standing. His hands were clasped in front of him. He took a quiet breath. Then, softly, he said, "No, Your Honor." A hush fell again. Justice Cole didn't push him. Instead, she turned back to the files. "There are two options before us," she said to the court. "We may either continue to pursue a full investigation into the mechanics of raindrop systems, or we may acknowledge that the foundation of this inquiry, namely that deception occurred with criminal intent, may no longer stand." The prosecutor didn't rise. He had already said enough. The courtroom watched as Justice Cole folded her hands. "For now," she said, "this court will enter the new documents into public record and suspend all proceedings pending further review by an independent panel." She banged her gavel once. Recess. But it wasn't just a pause in legal language. It was a pause in judgment. A break in the storm that had chased Keanu for days. The audience filed out slowly, quietly, as if no one wanted to shatter the fragile shift that had just taken place. Cameras followed him, but fewer questions were shouted. One photographer lowered her lens altogether, and out in the hallway, whispers began spreading, not of guilt, but of mystery. People wondered aloud how many lives had been changed because one man refused to take credit, how long he had done this in secret, and what it meant that he might never have told the truth, even now, if not forced into this courtroom. Outside the building, the public was waiting. Protesters had vanished, replaced with a small group holding signs that read, "Thank you, whoever you are. Silence speaks louder. Real heroes don't post." Keanu didn't speak as he walked through the growing crowd. But when he reached the bottom of the steps, someone stepped forward from the edge of the barricade. A teenage girl with a white cane and her mother beside her. The girl handed him a small note. He read it, then nodded once. No cameras saw what the note said, but a microphone picked up her mother, whispering, "She's from one of the raindrop clinics. She just wanted to say thank you." Keanu kept walking. The world still didn't fully understand what he had done. But it was beginning to, and the truth was finally surfacing, drop by drop. That evening, after the courthouse emptied and the press swarmed outside with new theories and headlines, Justice Meredith Cole remained in her chambers, alone. The room was quiet. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the federal buildings, casting a long orange glow across the polished wood of her desk. Her robe hung neatly over the back of her chair. In front of her sat the thick file folder, labeled Raindrop Systems, Supplemental Evidence. She hadn't touched it since court recess hours earlier. Not because she doubted its importance, but because something inside her didn't want to see it yet. She needed a moment where she wasn't the judge, where she wasn't the symbol of law, order, and discipline, where she could just be Meredith. She looked down at her desk drawer, hesitated, then slowly opened it. Inside was a single photograph, faded at the edges, taken 15 years earlier. A young man in military fatigue stood in front of a makeshift hospital tent. He was smiling. His sleeves were rolled up. His name tag read, Cole. Her brother, Thomas. Meredith picked it up, thumb brushing over the bottom corner where a coffee stain had bled into the image years ago. Thomas had died during a humanitarian mission in Sudan. Not from combat, but from betrayal. He had been working with a foreign aid operation designed to deliver medical supplies to remote villages. Everything had looked legitimate on paper. The organization had glossy brochures, private endorsements, a charming spokesperson who made the rounds on talk shows. But it had all been a lie. The aid never made it. The money disappeared into shell companies. And when Thomas tried to expose the truth, he was targeted, his team was cut off, and in the chaos that followed, he was killed in a roadside attack, without backup, without medication, without the support his mission had promised. His death had shaped everything Meredith believed about charity, celebrity, and justice. She had watched too many smiling public figures make pledges they never fulfilled. Too many wealthy benefactors hiding behind smoke and mirrors. Too many apologies that came too late. So when Keanu Reeves stood in her courtroom, refusing to speak, refusing to explain, she had seen not a noble man, but a dangerous one. Another illusion wrapped in silence. That's why she had gone hard on him. That's why her voice had held an edge others couldn't quite understand. But now, as she stared at the new evidence, legally authenticated, verified by independent financial experts, her certainty began to tremble. The funds weren't fake. The impact was real. And the list of projects was too vast, too far-reaching, too consistent to be a fluke. She opened the file. Page after page listed site coordinators, encrypted notes from anonymous donors, handwritten thank you letters from villages, clinics, and schools that had been told only one thing: keep going, someone believes in you. Meredith's jaw tightened. Could he really have done all this? Quietly? Meredith leaned back in her chair, the photograph of Thomas still resting beside the stack of documents. The two images, the smiling young soldier and the silent man in her courtroom, refused to separate in her mind. She read through the first dozen pages, then paused at one marked Kenya Solar Water Grid Installation, 2018. The letter inside wasn't official. It was handwritten in careful block letters by someone who clearly didn't speak English as a first language. It read, "We never knew who gave us the second chance, but because of you, our children no longer drink from the mud. Our women no longer walk 6 hours for water. Thank you, Silent One." No signature, just a drawing of a sun and a drop of water. It didn't prove anything legally, but it said everything she hadn't been willing to hear before. She set it aside and picked up a photograph, paperclipped to another page. It showed a dozen girls seated in a dusty room, each with a tablet in front of her. They were coding, learning Java. Their teacher stood in the background, smiling nervously. On the chalkboard behind them was a note in chalk: "Dreams travel faster than fear." Meredith stared at the photo for a long time. Her instincts had always told her to follow the paper trail, to find what people tried to hide, but this felt like someone had gone out of their way to leave no trail at all. Like every layer of anonymity was built not to mislead, but to protect. Not himself, but others. She stood up and walked to the window. The streetlights below blinked on one by one. Pedestrians moved in slow waves beneath the heavy dusk. She couldn't stop thinking about the look on Keanu's face as he stood there, taking blow after blow, saying nothing. Not in arrogance, not in guilt, but something else. It bothered her, because it reminded her of Thomas, the way he used to look when he knew something no one else did and had no intention of defending himself. The way he used to say, "You don't always have to explain a good thing, you just have to do it." She turned back to her desk and pulled the last few documents forward. One caught her eye. It was a receipt from a refugee education network based in Thessaloniki, Greece. The name of the former director was Eva Morales. And the note clipped to it was different from the others. It was typed, neat, precise. "If they ever come looking for blame, tell them it wasn't mine to carry. I just passed it forward." No signature again, just a dash. Meredith stared at it for a long time. Maybe this wasn't a cover-up. Maybe it was something else entirely. Something rare. Meredith took off her glasses and rubbed the corners of her eyes. The files were now spread across her desk like a puzzle she hadn't expected to solve. She had entered this case ready to issue a verdict, ready to uphold justice, as she always had, with clarity, discipline, and no room for interpretation. But this wasn't like anything she had ever encountered. She reached into her cabinet and retrieved her personal notebook. On the first blank page, she began writing in longhand, something she hadn't done in years. "Intent is the most dangerous thing to misjudge," she wrote, "because the moment you assume someone's reason, you stop looking for their truth." She paused, then added, "If this man did what it appears he did, then silence wasn't a shield. It was a language." She closed the notebook and sat back again, unsure of what the next day would bring in court. Her position was unchanged in the public record. No opinions, no decisions until all evidence was reviewed. But inside, something had shifted. She thought of Thomas again. He would have laughed at her for being so rigid. He used to say, "Justice without empathy is just a gavel-hitting stone." The memory made her smile faintly. A knock on the chamber door broke the silence. Her clerk entered, holding another envelope. "This came from the independent financial panel," the clerk said. "They just delivered it. It's the final verification on the raindrop trail." Meredith took the envelope and nodded for the clerk to leave. She opened it slowly, scanning the first few lines. It was official. The panel had confirmed that Raindrop Systems had no personal profit-taking, no political donors, and no legal violations of international aid protocols. It operated under blind trusts, dispersed microgrants, and never filed for tax deductions. In short, it had every marker of being authentic, if unorthodox. And while the paper trail still didn't name Keanu Reeves directly, there was one telling footnote. An anonymous donor had quietly funneled an exact amount to match a known property sale from Keanu's private estate in Montana. Dated the same month, Raindrop funded a cluster of hospitals in Southeast Asia. She leaned back in her chair. He hadn't bought his innocence. He had sold his privacy for people who would never know his name. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The legal process would have to play out. Protocol required certain formalities. But deep down, she knew what she would never be able to unsee. Not a celebrity savior, not a cunning manipulator, just a man who refused to be seen doing the right thing, and was punished for it. And maybe, just maybe, she had almost let her own pain turn that into a crime. Meredith turned off the lamp. She stood in the dark a moment longer, the city glowing beyond the window. And for the first time since the trial began, she didn't feel like a judge. She felt like a witness. The following morning, the courtroom doors opened to an unexpected delivery. A single courier wheeled in a locked crate, sealed with an official court chain of custody tag. Behind it stood two representatives from the International Witness Coalition, a neutral organization that rarely involved itself in high-profile cases, unless something extraordinary was at stake. Judge Meredith Cole sat upright as her clerk approached, with a thin stack of papers. "These are verified testimonies, Your Honor," the clerk explained. "Submitted voluntarily from Raindrop beneficiaries, collected within 24 hours of last night's media exposure. Each has been notarized, time-stamped, and identity confirmed. They're requesting the court hear their words aloud." Justice Cole nodded once. The first letter was opened carefully. It came from a woman named Miriam, a former teacher in Aleppo, Syria. Her voice was recorded on a device, translated into English. We were hiding in the ruins of a bombed-out school. My daughter had no medicine. My son had lost part of his hand. Then, one day, someone showed up with a solar-powered radio and a waterproof box of supplies. The person wouldn't speak. They only handed me a phone with a number. I called it. 2 weeks later, a mobile clinic appeared. They didn't say who funded it, but the note in the box read, "You are not forgotten." The courtroom remained silent as the next envelope was opened. A second testimony from Detroit. My name is Angela. I'm a single mom. My son was born with a rare condition that insurance wouldn't cover. I tried every fundraiser, every program. One night, I got an anonymous check with exact instructions. Take him to a doctor in Cleveland. Everything was prepaid. I thought it was a mistake, but it wasn't. They called themselves Raindrop. I always thought it had to be someone famous, someone good. We think it was Keanu Reeves. The murmur in the courtroom grew louder. Justice Cole held up her hand. The room quieted again. A third letter was unsealed. This one came from a prison in San Salvador. The voice belonged to a man named Diego, once a high-ranking gang member. The letter was handwritten in rough English, scrawled and patched with tape. I killed people. I sold drugs. I thought I'd die that way. Then my little sister got sick. The hospital refused her. I prayed for the first time in 10 years. Next day, a nurse told me someone had paid everything. When I got out, I found a job at the same hospital. Now I work security. I never found out who paid, but one time someone left a book for me, The Power of Redemption. The tag said, "Keep going." That's all it said, but when I saw Keanu Reeves on the news, I swear, I felt it in my chest. It was him. It had to be. Each letter brought a hush heavier than the last. None were proof. None were sworn under cross-examination, but each one whispered something bigger than facts. The next letter was smaller than the rest, written in block print with shaky handwriting. It had no return address, just a tiny handprint in faded paint on the corner of the paper. It was from a blind boy in northwest Syria. I don't know what colors look like, but someone sent me a machine that speaks. I can now hear books. I can hear music. I learned math. They said someone named Raindrop gave it. I don't know what a raindrop is, but my mom cried, not because she was sad, but because someone remembered us. If I ever meet the person, I will say, "Thank you for giving me the sound of the world." No name, no signature, just the words. Then came the final envelope. It was thicker, multiple pages. Justice Cole adjusted her glasses as the clerk handed her the file. She skimmed the cover page. It came from an underground women's health network in Iran, verified through diplomatic channels. The director had died last year, but before her passing, she left behind a series of detailed memos. Each one chronicled a pattern of anonymous deposits made into private clinics throughout high-risk areas. Every donation came under the same code name. One passage was read aloud. I asked once, "Who is R?" The courier smiled and said, "Not a person, a promise." I asked again. He leaned in and whispered, "You know him. You just don't know you do." That night, I watched a movie, The Matrix, and I knew. I just knew. That was the moment the courtroom changed. No accusations were thrown, no applause was given, but there was something unmistakable in the stillness. The way strangers glanced at one another, the way even the most skeptical journalists stopped scribbling, because a pattern was forming, a trail of good, and it all pointed to the man who still hadn't spoken a word. Justice Cole took a long breath and looked toward Keanu. He sat as always, straight-backed, eyes calm, hands still. No smile, no nod, only quiet. The judge spoke into the microphone again. "These testimonies," she said carefully, "are not legal proof. But they represent something far more rare than courtroom evidence. They represent consistency, impact, and the weight of human gratitude multiplied across borders. She leaned forward, folding her hands. The court has been tasked with deciding whether silence is concealment or principle, whether this man acted with deceit or restraint. These letters, they are not definitive, but they are clear. Her eyes didn't leave Keanu's. "And I am listening." She tapped her gavel once, then recessed for the day. As the courtroom slowly emptied, a reporter was heard whispering into her mic. "No official ruling yet, but the tide is turning. One man's silence is echoing louder than we imagined." And outside, as the crowd grew again on the courthouse steps, one sign stood taller than the rest. It read, "Maybe the real evidence is all the people who survived." The courtroom was unusually still that morning. The bailiff's voice barely rose above a whisper when he announced the next witness. Cameras flashed briefly, then stopped, as a woman in a navy blue blazer took the stand. Eva Morales. Her steps were careful, almost hesitant, but her eyes never left Keanu. She sat down, placed her hands in her lap, and waited. Justice Meredith Cole nodded once to the clerk. "You may proceed." The prosecutor stood. "Ms. Morales, can you state your occupation?" "I run a nonprofit tech network for displaced youth. We teach coding and digital communication to refugees and underserved communities." "And how did your organization come into contact with the entity known as Raindrop Systems?" Ava paused. Her voice trembled, not from nerves, but from something deeper. "It was 2019. We had just lost our final donor. Our building lease was expiring. We had 3 weeks before we'd shut down." "And what happened?" "An encrypted email came in. No name, no logo, just an offer. Funding for 3 years, full operational budget, plus equipment. The only condition was that we never try to trace the source and never reveal where the money came from." "Did you accept?" "We did. We were desperate." The prosecutor walked slowly toward the jury box. "And was there any communication afterward?" Eva nodded. "One letter. A thank you, signed by a courier, no return address. But inside was a small note. It said, 'The world needs people like you. Don't stop.' That was it." Justice Cole leaned forward slightly. "Why are you testifying today, Ms. Morales?" Eva reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed folder. I kept the letter. She opened it carefully, then held it up for the court to see. It was stored in a preservation sleeve. Not for legal reasons. I kept it because it reminded me that someone believed in us. But when I saw the news this week, I had it scanned for prints. There was a hush. Justice Cole narrowed her eyes. "And?" Eva held up a secondary document. It was tested by a private lab. One partial fingerprint was on the edge of the note. It matched a public biometric database for Keanu Reeves. The room fell completely silent. Keanu didn't move. Justice Cole sat back, stunned. The prosecutor hesitated, then asked, "To be clear, Ms. Morales, are you stating that this letter, bearing Keanu Reeves' fingerprint, was directly connected to the Raindrop donation that saved your organization?" "Yes." "Are you saying Keanu Reeves is the donor?" Eva's voice shook, but she didn't look away from Keanu as she spoke. "I'm saying I've always known, and I never said it out loud, because I respected the silence. But now the world is accusing him of hiding something dark. I think it's time the truth speaks. Because he won't." Her last sentence rang out across the courtroom like a bell. People shifted in their seats. A few reporters looked stunned. One juror pressed her hand over her heart. And at the center of it all, Keanu Reeves remained still, silent, but no longer alone. Justice Cole glanced down at the folder Eva had handed over. She waved for the clerk to bring it forward. As the courtroom waited, her gaze settled again on Keanu. Still silent, still composed, She unfolded the note herself, careful not to smudge the evidence. There was a faint smudge where the fingerprint had been lifted, circled, and marked with laboratory verification. Beneath it, the message still held its quiet power. The world needs people like you. Don't stop. Her fingers hovered for a second over the paper. Then she folded it shut. I need a 10-minute recess, she said, her voice firmer now. The gavel hit the block once. The moment the judge exited, the room exploded, not with shouting, but with an overwhelming surge of whispered voices, tapping keys, and swarming questions no one could yet answer. Keanu stood slowly and turned toward Ava. Their eyes met for the first time. She gave a small nod, not of recognition, but of understanding. Back in her chambers, Justice Cole stood at her window again. She stared out at the press, crowded beyond the barricades, microphones in hand, drones buzzing over the courthouse. She had spent years shielding herself from the emotional weight of testimony. It had been the only way to survive the grief of losing Thomas, and the cynicism that followed. But Eva Morales had pierced something in her, something she thought had long since gone dormant. The idea that someone could do good, not for credit, not for strategy, but because it was simply right. She returned to her desk, opened a fresh page in her notebook, and began to write. The burden of truth is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quietest thing in the room. Downstairs, court resumed. Justice Cole re-entered, her face unreadable. Before we proceed, she said slowly, this court acknowledges the testimony of Ms. Morales and the submitted evidence. While not conclusive on its own, it introduces a significant pattern of corroboration. She turned to Keanu. Mr. Reeves, I will ask you again. Would you like to respond to the accusations before the court? He stood, met her eyes. No, Your Honor. No bravado. No evasion. Just the truth, as he had always lived it. The courtroom buzzed for a moment, then stilled again. And then, something unexpected happened. A member of the audience, a woman seated along the far wall, stood up. She was elderly, dressed simply, with a cane in one hand and a paper in the other. Your Honor, she said respectfully, may I be heard? The judge hesitated. Ma'am, the gallery is not open for public statements at this time. I understand, the woman said, lifting the paper, but I believe I have something that belongs in the record. The judge looked to security, then back to the woman. Approach. She shuffled forward and handed the note to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Justice Cole unfolded it and read silently, then looked up, visibly shaken. It was another thank you note, addressed to the woman's grandson, a child who had received a life-saving surgery in Peru. At the bottom, the signature, just an arc. The tide had turned, and for the first time since the trial began, the courtroom believed him. The courtroom had gone completely still. No more murmurs, no more rustling of paper, not even the subtle hum of reporters whispering into recorders. There was only the sound of the judge's voice, clear, steady, and absolute. Mr. Reeves, Justice Cole said, we've heard testimony, we've seen documentation, but the court cannot proceed without hearing directly from you. I'm asking, not as a judge, but as a citizen. Will you speak now? Keanu looked at her quietly. For a moment, it seemed like he might stay silent forever, but then, slowly, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. What he pulled out wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a defense brief or a prepared statement. It was a notebook, weathered, the edges curled, the spine bent from years of use. Faint black ink stained the cover, and a worn elastic band held the pages shut. He stared at it for a moment, then stepped toward the witness stand. May I read something? He asked. Justice Cole nodded. Please. He opened the notebook with care, flipping past pages filled with sketches, half-thoughts, and scribbled reminders. Finally, he landed on one page, the only one bookmarked. He looked up once, not at the press, not at the prosecutor, but at Eva Morales. And then, without preamble, he began to read. This is something I wrote over 20 years ago. I never meant to share it. It's not a defense. It's not proof. It's just what I told myself the day I realized that fame could be a currency, and that I had to decide how to spend it." He paused, then read aloud, "To the me that's still trying to understand what this all means. Fame is a spotlight. It burns through everything. It makes people see only what they want to. You become a symbol, not a person. And the more you're seen, the more invisible you feel inside. You can try to fight it. You can try to run from it. Or you can try to use it, not to build a tower, but to open a door. I don't want to be remembered for what I said in interviews, or what car I drove, or what I wore at some premiere. I want to be remembered by people who never knew my name. People who looked up one day and found help when they thought they were out of time. I don't need to be the reason they survived. I just want to be the reason they didn't give up." He turned the page gently. "I've learned that the best kind of legacy is the kind you never see come back to you. The kind that doesn't carry your name, but carries your heart. The kind that gives someone else one more hour, one more day, one more shot. That's why I stayed silent. That's why I never took credit." His voice was even, not dramatic, just true. Justice Cole blinked slowly, caught off guard by the vulnerability. And somewhere in the back row, a sound broke the silence. A sniffle. The bailiff wiped his eyes discreetly, staring at the ground. But Keanu kept reading. Keanu's fingers lingered on the next line. The ink here was smudged, as if it had been written with emotion too close to the surface. He read on. "I know that someday I'll be misunderstood, maybe hated, maybe mocked. And that's okay. The story was never supposed to be about me. It's about the kids who thought no one would show up, the mother who needed one miracle, the village that needed one well, the teacher who needed one computer, and the people who deserved one more reason to believe in kindness without cameras. I write this not to prove anything, but to remind myself. I am not here to be the light. I'm here to pass it forward." He looked up again. This time, his eyes searched the faces around him, some skeptical, some softened, some visibly moved. Then he closed the notebook. That's all. For a moment, no one moved. It wasn't that they were stunned. It was something quieter than that, something deeper. It was reverence. Justice Cole exhaled slowly, her fingers curled under her chin. "Mr. Reeves, why keep that letter? Why now?" Keanu looked down, his voice softer than ever. "Because there are days I still forget, and when I do, I read that page." Silence. Then, from somewhere near the front row, a young man who had remained quiet the entire trial stood up and spoke without permission. "My sister's school in Uganda got solar lights 2 years ago," he said. "No name on the donation, but the packages all said R. My family never knew who to thank." The judge didn't stop him. Instead, she looked at Keanu again. "Did you do these things?" she asked. Not with suspicion, but with curiosity. Keanu gave a slight shrug. "I just tried to keep a promise I made to myself." "And what promise was that?" He hesitated, then replied, "To never waste the spotlight, not even for a second." The courtroom remained utterly still. The judge leaned back in her chair. For the first time, her expression softened. Not with forgiveness, but with a kind of reluctant awe. "Let the record reflect," she said quietly, "that Mr. Reeves has offered no legal defense, only a personal one." And with that, she adjourned the session. Outside, the courthouse erupted again, with flashing lights, reporters screaming questions, voices overlapping. But inside, a strange calm settled over the room. As people slowly rose from their seats and began to file out, more than one paused to glance back at the empty stand where Keanu had just stood. Not as a defendant, not as a celebrity, but as a man who had chosen to speak only when silence had nothing left to teach. And back on the bench, the weathered notebook sat unopened again. No autographs, no press statements. Just one promise, made quietly in a world that rarely listens. By the next morning, the narrative had changed. The same headlines that once screamed, "Keanu exposed," were replaced with quieter, more reflective ones. The silent legacy of Keanu Reeves? Kindness without credit, the story behind R. What if he never wanted us to know? Television anchors who had chuckled days earlier now opened their segments with apologies. Clips of the courtroom reading, Keanu's voice steady, notebook in hand, circulated faster than any viral meme. No graphics, no edits, just his voice and his words. One segment on a late-night show played back an old clip of a comedian mocking Keanu's blank stare in court. The screen then faded to black before cutting to Keanu's line, "I'm not here to be the light. I'm here to pass it forward." The audience didn't laugh. They clapped. On social media, the shift was immediate. Silent strength began trending across all major platforms. People from every corner of the globe shared their own stories of anonymous kindness. Some believed they had been touched by Raindrop. Others simply felt inspired to act in the same spirit. An actress known for her activism posted a photo of Keanu in court with the caption, "This man's guilt is giving without taking credit. May we all be guilty too." A former tabloid writer wrote a long apology thread, admitting that they had sensationalized Keanu's silence because quiet doesn't sell until it reveals something louder than words. Even celebrities who had never spoken about philanthropy before began acknowledging his influence. A famous tech mogul tweeted, "In a world obsessed with followers, Keanu followed only his conscience." But Keanu himself remained silent still. His spokesperson released one brief message. Mr. Reeves appreciates the public's concern but respectfully declines interviews. He believes the story is no longer his. At the courthouse, Judge Meredith Cole replayed a clip of her own words from day one of the trial. "Mr. Reeves, you're not above the law." The way she had said it, sharp, cold, preemptive. She closed the video and leaned back in her chair, eyes stinging. In private, she had begun reviewing more of Raindrop's financial records, tracing the patterns. None of it led to power grabs or self-benefit. No political donations, no tax shelters. Just need met with resource, crisis met with speed, and an almost obsessive commitment to invisibility. She couldn't stop thinking about the fingerprint, or the boy in Syria, or the letter to himself that Keanu had never meant to read aloud. And now, the weight of her own voice haunted her, not because she had made a legal mistake, but because she had almost mistaken restraint for evasion. Because she had assumed, like so many others, that silence must mean concealment. Instead, it had meant discipline, principle, a deliberate refusal to turn kindness into currency. In a confidential memo to the ethics board, she wrote one sentence that wouldn't be seen by the public. "I fear I may have judged a mirror as if it were a mask." And still, as the world recalibrated its view of him, Keanu continued on without comment. He walked out of the courthouse that evening with no entourage, no fanfare, just the same quiet grace that had brought him in. A child waited by the steps, holding a crumpled drawing of a superhero with a beard. Keanu stopped, bent down, and smiled. He didn't sign it. He just looked the boy in the eye and said, "You have a good heart," then walked on. That same evening, a video surfaced on a small humanitarian news site. It showed an old aid worker in a flood-ravaged region of Bangladesh standing ankle-deep in water beside a solar power installation. She smiled into the camera, worn and weathered. "This light came when we had nothing left," she said. "They told us the donor wanted no recognition, but we heard the name Raindrop. We were told it might be a man from America." Then she said softly, "If he ever sees this, thank you. You saved our school." The video was only 2 minutes long, but it went viral in hours. And the public didn't just forgive Keanu, they became fiercely protective. Comment sections, once filled with suspicion and mockery, transformed into spaces of reflection. Strangers shared how his silence had made them rethink what real generosity looked like. A teenager in Missouri posted, "Keanu didn't clap for himself, and that made me want to stand up for him." A retired Marine commented, "In my world, the loudest ones got the medals, but it's the quiet ones you follow when it matters." He's one of those. The impact reached beyond sympathy. People started small projects under the hashtag #PassItForward. Anonymous donations spiked to underfunded causes. Letters and thank you cards were sent, not to Keanu directly, but to hospitals, schools, and refugee shelters across the world. A radio host in Texas opened his show by saying, "Today's Good News segment is brought to you by a ghost. His name is Keanu Reeves. And he's reminded us all how to disappear in service." Back in Los Angeles, a mural quietly went up overnight on the side of a community center. It showed a hand placing a stone on a foundation, with no face attached. The only words beneath it read, "Build quietly, build well." Justice Cole drove by the mural on her way to work the next morning. She pulled over, stared at it for several minutes, then drove off in silence. That day, she met with her clerk privately. "I want the final transcript to include every word from that notebook reading," she said. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Even though it wasn't technically part of the legal defense?" "Especially because it wasn't," the judge replied. "It wasn't law, it was something more." Meanwhile, Keanu's phone buzzed with offers from journalists, foundations, even a film studio wanting to option the story. He declined all of them. He told his team, "This isn't a comeback, it's a reminder. And not just for them, for me." That afternoon, he visited a quiet hillside overlooking the city. He sat on a bench, pulled out the notebook, and reread the page he had shared in court. Then he flipped to the next one. Blank. He reached into his pocket, clicked his pen open, and slowly began writing again. And somewhere, without a press release or a hashtag, the next raindrop fell. The courtroom was full again. It was the final day of proceedings, but the energy inside had shifted. The crowd no longer waited to see a celebrity fall. Now, they waited to see what the system would do in the face of something it hadn't expected. Quiet, unpublicized, good. Justice Meredith Cole entered the courtroom slowly, dressed in the same black robe, but her face carried a different weight. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes told another story. There was no gavel slam, no stern opening remarks. She took her seat, folded her hands, and stared out over the crowd. Then she looked directly at Keanu Reeves, who sat in the defendant's chair, his posture calm, hands resting in his lap. His notebook remained tucked in the pocket of his jacket. "We've gathered here under the assumption that something wrong had taken place," she began. Her voice was clear but slower than usual, almost thoughtful. "We were prepared to see arrogance, evasion, manipulation. That is often what follows when money moves through hidden channels." The courtroom was silent. "We were told the defendant had funded an offshore entity, that he had bypassed legal accountability, that his actions may have endangered the transparency of charitable work around the world." She looked down at her notes for a moment, then back up. "And yet, what we've discovered is something far more rare. Something this court doesn't often know how to define." Keanu's expression didn't change. He didn't look relieved. If anything, he looked more uncomfortable now than during the accusations. The judge continued, "I have reviewed every financial document, every pattern of funding, every letter from recipients. I've examined the network known as Raindrop Systems and its impact on humanitarian relief, technology education, refugee aid, and rural medical clinics across 15 countries." She took a breath. "And I have not found a single instance of personal enrichment, not one." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Justice Cole raised her hand gently. The room quieted again. "What I have found," she said, her voice softening, "is the evidence of someone who gave, persistently, and with no expectation of reward. Someone who chose to remain invisible, not because he had something to hide, but because he believed the spotlight should land on those who needed it more. There was a pause. Then she leaned slightly forward. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her tone more human than judicial now. "The law is often unequipped to process humility. We're trained to look for motive, gain, advantage, but every once in a while, justice requires something different." She stood slowly, and the room held its breath. Justice Cole looked at the courtroom full of spectators, reporters, and attorneys, then back at Keanu. "Sometimes," she said, "a good man doesn't look like the system expects. Sometimes he doesn't ask for praise. He doesn't offer explanations. He simply acts. With courage and conviction and care." Her voice grew firmer now. "I hereby dismiss all charges against Mr. Reeves, effective immediately. His actions, while unconventional, broke no laws. And more importantly, they honored a deeper kind of accountability. The kind we often forget." Gasps echoed around the courtroom. Some clapped softly before realizing the gravity of the moment and falling still again. But the judge wasn't finished. She turned to Keanu, stepped down from the bench, and walked toward him, something almost never done in that setting. She stopped just a few feet away. "I owe you an apology," she said, "not because I did my job, but because I expected the worst, and because I didn't believe that goodness could exist without an agenda." Keanu stood slowly, not out of pride, but respect. He gave a quiet nod. Justice Cole looked into his eyes and added more quietly now, "Thank you." And then, in front of everyone, she extended her hand, not as a judge, but as a citizen. Keanu didn't shake it. Instead, he bowed his head gently, then said, "It was never about me." A hush fell again. Then, slowly, from the back of the room, a young girl stood up. She held a printed copy of one of the raindrop donation letters, marked with a single R in the corner. Her mother joined her, tears in her eyes. Others followed. A man from Guatemala, a woman from Chicago, a teacher from rural Texas. One by one, they rose, not to cheer, but to stand witness, not to celebrate a celebrity, but to acknowledge a truth that had been hidden for far too long. And Keanu, standing in the middle of it all, never lifted his head. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply nodded again and began walking toward the exit, past the cameras, past the press, past the judge who had once doubted him and now stood quietly in respect. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Some chanted his name, some held signs, but when he stepped out, there was no fist in the air, no statement, no wave. He walked past them all with the same quiet step he'd entered with. Reporters called out for comment. He gave none. His car pulled up, a simple sedan, no driver, no security. He got in and closed the door. The window rolled down for a brief second, and to the nearest microphone, he said just 6 words. "Find someone. Help them." Then vanish. Then the window rolled back up, and the car drove off. In the days to follow, his words would be printed on shirts, painted on walls, even tattooed. But for Keanu, they weren't a message to the world. They were a personal reminder. And as he disappeared down the street, one thing became clear. Sometimes the greatest legacy is silence. Outside the courthouse, the scene had transformed. What had started days earlier as a chaotic media frenzy was now something else entirely. A sea of people stood behind metal barricades, not with jeering signs or aggressive questions, but with quiet expectation. The energy was reverent. Some held handmade posters that read, "Thank you, Keanu," or simply bore a symbol, the letter R inside a water droplet. The doors finally opened. Keanu stepped out alone, no security, no team, no statement prepared. He wore the same modest black suit from the day he'd arrived, but something about him was different now. The weight of suspicion had lifted, but he didn't walk any taller. He didn't smile, he just walked. The crowd watched silently, almost unsure whether to cheer or stay quiet out of respect. Some did applaud. Others simply raised their phones. But no one shouted. No one pushed forward. Keanu didn't wave. He didn't pause. He passed by the news microphones without acknowledging them. Reporters leaned over the rails, pleading for comment. He kept walking. Then he saw the man. At the end of the courthouse steps, slouched against a stone pillar, sat a homeless man. Gray beard, threadbare gloves, a cardboard sign with smeared lettering that simply read, "Still here." He didn't look up. Keanu slowed. Then he stopped. The man lifted his head just slightly. His eyes were tired, and he blinked slowly, as if not fully registering who stood before him. Keanu knelt down on the pavement. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask questions. He reached into his inner coat pocket, pulled out his wallet, and placed a folded bill into the man's hand. But then, as the man tried to thank him, Keanu unbuttoned his jacket and slid it off his shoulders. It was cold, windy. Cameras clicked in a frenzy as he draped the black coat gently over the man's back and tugged it into place like a blanket. Still not a word spoken. The man looked up, now wide-eyed. Keanu smiled, but it was the smallest, most fleeting expression. He stood, nodded once, and continued walking. That was when a camera from a small independent outlet captured the moment from just the right angle. Keanu kneeling, the coat mid-mater, the man's hand resting over his heart. The image would be printed in newspapers across the world the next day. No caption needed. A few blocks away, Keanu slipped into an alleyway to avoid more press. Someone spotted him moments later stepping out from behind a bookstore, adjusting the sleeves of a borrowed sweater. No entourage, no handlers, no limo. Just a man moving through the city as quietly as he always had. Later that night, a journalist for a major magazine published an essay titled, "The Day Silence Spoke Louder Than Any Speech." It opened with the now famous photo and a single line, "Keanu Reeves didn't win today." He reminded us we don't need to. The essay spread like wildfire. Within 12 hours, the article had been translated into 7 languages. News anchors quoted its closing paragraph on air. It read, "He spoke through silence. He answered with presence. And in a time of noise, he showed us what dignity looks like when no one is asking for it." The photograph of Keanu giving his coat to the homeless man was reprinted in full color across magazine covers, subway walls, and billboards. But what struck people most was what came next. The man in the photo was later identified as Thomas Avery, a former school teacher who had lost everything after a traumatic brain injury. His family had been looking for him for years. The photo reunited them. Keanu never commented on it. He didn't return any of the calls from interviewers or publishers. He didn't approve a single quote. In fact, he disappeared from public view entirely in the days that followed. He declined every appearance request. He turned down an invitation to accept a humanitarian award. He even rejected a documentary pitch from a respected filmmaker, replying only with, "There's nothing to say, just pay it forward." That short reply became another rallying cry. Pay It Forward began trending across platforms, not as a gimmick, as a movement. People bought groceries for strangers. Others quietly paid rent for struggling families in their neighborhoods. One woman left an envelope filled with cash and a note that read, "From the raindrop, you are not forgotten." Meanwhile, raindrop systems became the subject of deeper global investigation, but not the kind rooted in scandal. Instead, journalists and tech researchers began compiling maps of its impact. Wells dug in South Sudan, a new prosthetics lab in eastern Ukraine, a mobile hospital in Honduras, free Wi-Fi for students in Mississippi, all traced back to a single, quiet fund. And still, no one could find the central name attached to it. They didn't need to. People already knew. Justice Meredith Cole, now back in her chambers, was asked to give an interview. She initially refused, But a week later, she agreed to speak, only under one condition: that the focus would not be on her, but on what she learned. She sat in front of the camera and said, "I thought I was here to deliver justice, but that man taught me something different. He taught me to listen without expecting a performance, to look beyond the silence." She paused, and he reminded me that real goodness never announces itself. It just arrives. The interview was viewed over 10 million times in its first day, but it was her final sentence that stayed with people. You don't have to be Keanu Reeves to be decent. You just have to be quiet enough to see who needs you, and brave enough to show up. That sentiment echoed everywhere. In school speeches, on community walls, in late-night talk show monologues that, for once, weren't sarcastic. Even months later, the courthouse where the trial took place kept a framed print of the iconic coat photo in its entrance. Underneath it, a plaque read, "Let this remind us, justice without compassion is noise, and sometimes the truest verdict is the one that never makes a sound." 3 weeks after the trial ended, the phrase "silent legacy" had become more than a headline. It had become a movement. Raindrop Systems, once a mystery buried in the footnotes of financial reports, now had a Wikipedia page, translated into 38 languages. But even then, there was no official founder listed. No board, no headquarters, only impact. An interactive website went viral. It allowed users to scroll across a digital map and see where Raindrop had intervened. Each dot represented a moment of quiet giving: a village clinic in Rwanda, a youth literacy program in Kansas, a mental health hotline in South Korea. Each entry had a timestamp and one sentence. No donor claimed credit. News stations struggled to keep up. Every day, another nonprofit posted photos of anonymous donations they'd just received, with a note that simply read, "For your raindrop." In response, donation apps began rebranding their platforms to include an anonymous kindness option. Thousands of people checked the box. No names, no social media shares, no tax receipts, just giving. But the biggest ripple came not from software or news, but from the people who had once criticized Keanu. A well-known podcast host who had joked that Keanu was hiding money under his mattress released an emotional retraction. In it, he confessed, "I didn't understand what I was looking at. I assumed the worst. I didn't see the cost of quiet compassion." That clip alone hit 15 million views. The one celebrity, a pop star known for extravagant displays of charity, announced on her live stream that she was starting a new fund, but that she wouldn't be attaching her name to it. "I finally get it now," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Keanu didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to help, to keep going." But perhaps the most tangible sign of the legacy was what Eva Morales built next. After her courtroom testimony, Eva received hundreds of messages from people asking how to follow Keanu's example. At first, she tried answering them, one by one. Then she realized there needed to be a place for these people to gather, to share resources, to give without applause. So she started it. She called it Quiet Impact. The website was simple, a black screen with soft white letters. "This isn't about recognition, it's about results. Join us." Users could anonymously submit causes they supported. Others could contribute directly. No usernames, no leaderboards, no rankings, just action. Within a month, over 250,000 people joined. The first major project funded through Quiet Impact was a solar school in Mozambique. The second, a mobile trauma therapy van in Baltimore. The third, a job training center in a small, forgotten town in West Virginia. Eva never appeared on camera. She declined interviews. When asked if Keanu had helped launch it, she replied only, "Helped by disappearing." Her response baffled some, inspired others. Meanwhile, Keanu's name continued to surface, but never from him. Interviewers tried tracking him down for comment. They sent letters to his agency. They reached out to past co-stars. No one could get through. But behind the scenes, Quiet impact users started noticing something odd. Some of the anonymous donations came with messages, short, handwritten notes scanned and attached. One read, "For the boy who fixes bikes instead of breaking them." Another, "For the mother who stayed when no one else did." Each signed the same way. Our speculation grew about who was behind the donation signed with R, but the people benefiting didn't care. In a farming village in Argentina, a young girl received a laptop and a generator to continue remote schooling. In Harlem, a neighborhood youth center was rebuilt after years of decay. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no donor photo, only a folded note taped to the door that read, "You matter, keep going." The mystery of Raindrop only added to its legend, yet the most remarkable change wasn't the global headlines. It was the shift in everyday behavior. A wave of micro-kindness swept through communities. Strangers paid tolls for the cars behind them. Teachers received anonymous gift cards in their mailboxes. Nurses found new scrubs waiting in their lockers. And always, in some quiet corner of the gesture, was that single mark. News outlets called it a cultural reset. Some tried to commercialize it. A major retailer released a limited raindrop jacket. It failed. People didn't want to wear it. They wanted to live it. Eva Morales continued to steer Quiet Impact from a small co-working space in Portland. She refused all licensing offers, foundation grants, and government partnerships. The website remained ad-free, donation-only, and untraceable. Her only official post on the site came one morning, 6 weeks after the trial. It was a message for new members. "The one who taught us this never asked for applause. He just gave. If you've come here looking for him, you've missed the point. If you've come here looking for someone to help, you're exactly where you need to be." The comment section lit up, though no usernames appeared, only timestamps. Some simply typed, "Thank you." Others wrote, "I was one of them." A few left nothing at all, just that single letter. Meanwhile, college students began forming campus chapters called Silent Circles. Their mission was simple: identify one person in crisis and help them completely anonymously. No meetings, no social media pages, no t-shirts. In a world obsessed with visibility, the quiet spread like wildfire. And Keanu? He remained absent from public life. No press conferences, no podcast appearances, no film premieres. But one day, someone spotted him walking through a street fair in Vancouver. He wore sunglasses and a hoodie, bought 2 churros from a food stand, and vanished into the crowd. That same day, the food vendor discovered his stall had been paid forward for the next 100 customers. The receipt was signed, "Thanks for feeding the soul, our." Back in Los Angeles, a mural appeared near the courthouse. It showed a coat being gently draped over the shoulders of a seated figure. The giver had no face, just a silhouette, painted in grayscale. But everyone knew who it was. Underneath, a single quote stretched across the wall in careful lettering. "Be the kind of quiet that echoes." No one claimed the mural, no artist took credit. People left flowers at the base. 1 week later, someone left behind a folded piece of paper. On it, a handwritten message. "Not all heroes speak. Some just stay until the job is done." Signed. The sky was turning a shade of lavender, that quiet moment before dusk surrenders to night. A cool breeze moved over the sand, stirring the grains into gentle ripples. The beach was almost empty. Just the whisper of waves, the distant cry of a gull, and a solitary figure standing barefoot at the shoreline. Keanu Reeves stood at the edge where the ocean met the earth. No cameras, no crowds, no questions. Just silence. His black boots dangled from one hand, laces looped around his fingers. In the other hand, a weathered leather notebook, edges curled, covers soft with time. He had carried it for years. Most pages were full now, Some held old movie quotes, others pieces of advice from strangers he met during travels, but the final pages had turned into something else entirely. Reflections. He lowered himself slowly onto a smooth driftwood log, setting the notebook on his lap. For a long moment he just sat, letting the sound of the waves speak into the stillness of his thoughts. This was where he always came when the world became too loud. He flipped open the notebook to a dog-eared page and ran his fingers across the words as if they were braille. The page read, "Don't be loud to be heard, be true to be felt." He had written that after speaking with a hospice nurse in New Orleans. She told him the most powerful people she'd met were the ones who whispered comfort into dying ears, not the ones shouting from podiums. He remembered how her words stayed with him, like a stone in his shoe. They rubbed until he finally understood. Keanu turned the page and found a photo tucked inside, a black and white picture of a boy holding a rebuilt bicycle. The photo had no caption, no location. He'd received it years ago from someone who never revealed their name. Just a note attached. "You saved my brother. Thank you." He remembered nothing about the donation. He hadn't kept track. That had been the point. Now, though, the world had noticed. Not because he had asked for it, but because silence, when genuine, eventually echoes louder than sound. He glanced at the photo again, then looked up. The sun was inching toward the horizon. The water shimmered with a trail of gold. He stood, brushing the sand from his jeans, and walked to the water's edge. The tide washed over his feet, cool and foamy, then receded. Again and again, like time itself refusing to stop. He didn't smile for the camera. There wasn't one. But a faint smile touched his lips anyway. Knowing one. As if he had heard something in the silence no one else could. Keanu stepped a little deeper into the surf, letting the salt water rise past his ankles. It was cold, but he didn't flinch. There was something grounding about the ocean. Its refusal to change for anyone. No matter who stood before it, it simply moved with the moon, unbothered and endless. He thought of Judge Meredith Cole, her face when she dismissed the charges, the brief tremble in her voice, the unspoken apology in her eyes. She had been ready to tear him apart because she believed he was dangerous, reckless, unaccountable. And she wasn't entirely wrong. He had taken risks, moved money across borders, funded operations that existed outside traditional structures. But he had done it without seeking attention, without attaching his face. Because he knew what happened when fame contaminated giving. It made generosity performative, transactional. It made kindness a campaign. He'd learned that the hard way. Years ago, after one of his first big donations went public, the attention became unbearable. Journalists twisted it, trolls accused him of being a fraud. Even some of the people he tried to help started treating him like a brand, not a man. That was when he decided, never again. And that's when Raindrop was born. A legal phantom. No employees, just a stream of shell companies designed not to protect him, but to protect the gift. Not even his financial advisor knew everything. And that was intentional. He took out the notebook again, another page, this one scribbled more chaotically, the handwriting uneven. It was dated 2 years earlier, just after a brief stay in a village outside Bogota. If you can disappear into the help, you'll find the people who matter most. He'd written that after watching a teenage girl get her first pair of shoes from a relief worker. Her smile wasn't for the camera. She had no idea who funded it. It didn't matter. She had dignity. That was enough. A breeze picked up, lifting the corner of the notebook. Keanu closed it gently, securing it under his hand. In the distance, a family walked along the beach with their dog. A little boy ran toward the waves and shrieked when they chased him back. Keanu watched them for a moment, the simple joy of it all. It reminded him of something he'd written and forgotten years ago. The loudest love is often wordless. That was the essence of Raindrop. No sound, no announcement, just action. And now that it had been exposed, it wasn't about protecting the structure anymore. It was about letting it survive on its own, letting others carry it forward. That's why he had stayed silent in court. Not because he was ashamed, but because he believed in a world where truth didn't always need a voice. Only a vessel. Keanu walked slowly along the shoreline, the tide teasing the edge of his footprints, trying to erase them. Each step forward felt weightless. He didn't know how long he'd been walking, only that he was moving toward the place where the sky kissed the sea. Quietly, gently, with no need to prove anything. As he walked, he recalled something the judge had said under her breath before leaving the courtroom. "You make people question how goodness should look." He hadn't answered her, but the words echoed now, out here in the silence. She was right. Goodness didn't have a face. It didn't always look like a handshake or a headline. Sometimes it was a quiet transaction between two hearts, one of them invisible. He reached the end of the curve where the beach met a rocky inlet. The sun was halfway dipped below the horizon, casting a copper glow over the water. The notebook was still in his hand. He opened it one last time. There, at the very back, was the final page. Blank until now. He took a moment, then pulled a pen from his coat pocket and wrote, "Your legacy is not your name. It's the echo you leave behind in the people who never knew it was you." He looked at the words for a long time, then closed the notebook and pressed it against his chest. A breeze rolled in again, stronger now, as if the world had exhaled. Turning to face the ocean, Keanu stepped forward until the waves reached his knees. Then he stood still, eyes on the horizon, letting the cold soak into him. Not as punishment, not as meditation, just being. It was in that moment that a faint smile curved across his face. Not because he had won, not because the world knew the truth, but because, despite everything, he had kept the promise to himself. He had given without needing to be seen. He had stayed quiet when the world begged for noise. He had chosen purpose over recognition. As the last sliver of sun disappeared beneath the water, Keanu took one final look toward the open sea. Then he turned back toward the sand, walking slowly away from the waves, barefoot, calm, grounded. He left no words behind, no final statement, only footprints, and they too were already fading. The world often mistakes silence for surrender, for shame, for guilt. But in the case of Keanu Reeves, silence wasn't the absence of truth. It was the vessel that carried it. In the days following the trial, the public tried to make sense of what had just happened. Articles were rewritten. Talk show hosts, once mocking, aired quiet retractions. Editorials explored the difference between performance and principle. But even as the headlines tried to catch up, one truth remained untouched by all commentary. Keanu had never once defended himself. Not in that courtroom, not on social media, not in the press conferences he refused to hold. He had simply stood there, present. And somehow, that stillness moved more than outrage ever could. Images from the trial circled the globe. The gavel raised midair. Judge Meredith Cole's furrowed brow. Eva Morales with trembling hands as she held up the letter, the bailiff discreetly wiping a tear. But one image lived longer than the rest. The moment outside, when Keanu took off his coat and gave it to the man huddled by the courthouse steps. There were no words exchanged, only a gesture. And somehow, that became the speech no one had expected. It spoke louder than the judge's rebuke, louder than the prosecuting attorney's accusations, louder even than the thunderous applause that came when the charges were dismissed. Because that coat, the one wrapped around a man the world usually overlooks, wasn't just fabric. It was proof. Proof that even after everything, Keanu didn't need validation. He didn't need to be cleared. He didn't need to be understood. He only needed to keep doing what he had always done. And for the first time, people were finally ready to see it. In the courtroom, Justice Cole had undergone her own quiet transformation. Once rigid, armored by grief and suspicion, she had stood in front of the entire room and said something no one expected. Sometimes, justice means recognizing a good man doesn't always look like the system expects. That single sentence became a turning point not just for Keanu, but for everyone watching. It made people ask different questions. What if we've been looking for goodness in the wrong places? What if real heroes don't announce themselves? What if kindness is meant to be invisible? Those questions didn't fade with the news cycle. They started movements. Raindrop Systems was no longer just a mysterious fund, it became a model. A way to give without glory. A way to build without branding. And in cities across the world, people began creating their own quiet impact initiatives. No logos, no hashtags, just acts of grace paid forward in silence. In one classroom in Mumbai, a teacher read aloud one of the anonymous letters that had surfaced during the trial. A letter from a blind child in Syria, describing the first time he heard a voice on a donated audio device that spoke in his language and taught him math. The child had written, "I do not know who sent the learning box, but I know he must care about children who are invisible, so I want to be like him. I want to care too." The children in that classroom didn't know Keanu Reeves. Most had never seen a Hollywood film, but they knew what kindness felt like, and that was enough. Meanwhile, Eva Morales returned to her project. Now publicly acknowledged as one of the first recipients of Raindrop's anonymous gifts, she was flooded with messages, some asking for help, others offering it. But the message that moved her most came from a teenage girl in Sudan who simply wrote, "If someone who never knew me believed in my future, maybe I can believe in myself too." Eva never responded publicly. She didn't launch a brand or publish a book. Instead, she followed the blueprint Keanu had shown her. Quiet, clear, and without ego, she helped build a digital infrastructure called Quiet Impact, a tool designed to let donors give anonymously and let communities vote on what they truly needed. The platform took off. Within weeks, donations flowed from small towns in Idaho to war-torn villages in Yemen, all without fanfare. Celebrities took notice. A few tried to replicate the model. But the ones who succeeded weren't the ones who made a show of it. They were the ones who said nothing and simply acted. It was no longer about Keanu Reeves. It never had been. And that, perhaps, was the most profound part of the story. Because the moment a story stops being about one person, it starts becoming a movement. The courtroom where it all began now had a quiet plaque in the hallway, a simple etching of the quote that Judge Cole had read aloud on the day of her ruling. Not her own words, Keanu's, from the notebook he'd carried. "Don't be loud to be heard. Be true to be felt." Visitors paused when they read it. Some took photos. Others simply stood in silence, letting the words sink in. Even Judge Cole, now retired, came back once. She didn't notify anyone, didn't bring a camera. She just walked the corridor, paused at the plaque, and touched the metal with her fingertips. Then she whispered something only the walls could hear. In the years that followed, the story became harder to tell, not because people forgot, but because it transformed. It stopped being about a trial, a celebrity, or even a mysterious charity. It became a question, a mirror, a quiet invitation. Images still circulated. Black and white photos now framed in community centers and schools. The one of Eva holding the letter. The courtroom mid-session, faces turned toward Keanu, the homeless man wrapped in the coat. And one final shot. Keanu, standing at the shoreline at dusk, eyes locked on the horizon. No caption, no credit. But under that photo, someone had written a simple phrase. Where the world judged his silence as guilt, he answered not with defense, but with goodness. It was this legacy, invisible and immeasurable, that reshaped how people understood influence, not as power, but as responsibility, not as a spotlight, but as a lantern. Keanu never gave another interview about the case. He didn't go on a redemption tour. In fact, he disappeared from public view for months. But the effect of his silence remained. Because silence, when rooted in truth, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a force. It becomes a choice. And in a world built on noise, that choice echoed. Today, if you visit certain aid stations, you'll see a small decal on some supply crates. It's not a logo, just a symbol. Two open hands, palms up, holding nothing. It doesn't say raindrop. It doesn't say Reeves. But everyone knows. It means someone helped, without needing credit, without needing to be seen, just because. And so, we end not with applause or answers, but with reflection. If you had the same influence, the same reach, the same capacity to change the world without ever taking credit, what would you do? Would you stay quiet, or would you speak up? Would you choose legacy or spotlight? Would you build a brand, or build something that didn't need one? And when the world accused you, misunderstood you, maybe even mocked you, would you defend yourself? Or would you keep walking, quietly, toward what mattered most? You've heard Keanu's story, not the one told in interviews or trending hashtags, but the one whispered through acts of courage and quiet generosity. Now we want to hear yours. What would you do if you had Keanu's influence? Would you stay quiet or speak up? Share your thoughts below. And if you want more incredible stories of quiet strength, tell us who Keanu should meet next. Your comment might just shape the next story.